Hello, friends. This is Dorie Clark here on behalf of Newsweek, and I am with my friend Bryan Kramer. Bryan is an executive coach. He's the author of multiple books. One is called Shareology. Another is called There Is No B2B or B2C. It's only H to H, human to human. And we are so excited to have the opportunity to talk with him today because, of course, this is a week when most people are stressed out of their minds, and we could probably all use a little bit more humanity in what we do. Bryan Kramer, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. I am so stoked to be on here with you.
Thank you. Great to have you. And welcome also to all of you who are tuning in live. One of the great parts about the weekly live sessions that we do for Newsweek is that we're here every Thursday, and we love to get your interaction and to see who's here. So please go ahead, type into the chat box and let us know who's here, where you're calling in from. We'd love to see you and to hear you, and of course to take your questions as we progress with Bryan. So Bryan, the first thing that I'm curious about, I mean, especially this week when everybody is feeling, I think, just a lot of tension and pressure as we are waiting to see what's going on with the election. There's been a lot more thought and focus around the question of being human, being ourselves, bringing that kind of humanity back to all the things that we do. Now, it's been several years since you wrote your book. You were really, I think, on the vanguard of it. When you talk about bringing humanity back to business, what do you mean by that? And how can we do it?
It's so it's interesting because when I first wrote that book, you're right, it was 4 years ago, and that book was the intention for that book at the time was a little bit different than how it's hitting now. And I think in 4 years, it's going to be totally different again. What I mean by that is 4 years ago, it was written with the intention of social media was actually rather new still then. And still on the scene, so many changes. If you think about what's happened in the last 4 years about all the social platforms, but at the heart of it, what it meant is that everybody had access to everybody around the world. And that was the first time that conversations were open between people within companies and outside of companies, which kind of redefines how businesses see other businesses and how people see other people and how businesses see people and vice versa. And so it's really, it really was about that and how do we connect globally. What it then kind of morphed into is that we are starting to see, and this actually came out in my second book, more technology on the scene, and even more so now. You think about augmented reality and artificial intelligence and robots and bots and automation and email automation and automating ads. And are you really talking to a real person? And all of this stuff is starting to become a question of how do you humanize, back to your question, how do you humanize when you're using technology, and what's the right fit and what's the right mix between the two? And I like to think that it's technology and humans working together to make all that happen. And at the end of the day, again, this is all going to change in 4 years. And I predict that we are going to have to work harder to be more human than ever before, to stand out and have and to show that we are human and we have human touch points in all of our different systems, especially within businesses, so that they know that there is really a human that they can talk to, that there really is somebody on the other end. And so it's not a question of if you need to humanize your business. It's going to be a fact that everyone is going to have to humanize their business. And there's multiple ways of doing that, but that is going to be the most important thing possible. And to answer your question, it's really simplifying the process. It's simplifying, where do human touch points show up? At what point, when you're putting a marketing plan together, will humans actually come in on the scene and have a real conversation? At what point will salespeople really have a conversation? I mean, you could just map it out. You could walk up to a whiteboard and map out your entire customer journey and just look at everything and go, do we have enough human touch points in this? And that's a great way just to see where you're missing, like what could be some really large holes in your humanization of your company. But that's the simple way of doing it.
I think that's so interesting, Brian. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've certainly seen that in my experience, that so often I'll get an email from a reader, for instance, and I'll write back to them and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't think I would really hear from you." I think they somehow thought that there were like literally robots on the other end processing it. But it's amazing the disproportionate impact that you can have on people when you actually do something as simple as just write back or respond to somebody's note. So that's great. And I also want to give a shout out to some of our terrific folks who are here joining us live. Thank you so much. I see Lisa's here from New York. We have Michael and Veronica, Gary from St. Louis, Richard and Leslie, who I believe, Brian, are your parents. Hi, Richard and Leslie. Special shout out to you. We've got Ty. We have Christina from Prague. We have Felicia from Pennsylvania. Oh my gosh, you must be really stressed, Felicia. We have Vidya Sagar from India. Oh my gosh. Anne and Richard from London, Rosinda. We have Palpina from the Netherlands. This is a fantastic international crew. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We're thrilled to have you here. If you have questions for Brian, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We want to hear what's on your mind. But Brian, I want to just start by asking a question that I'm curious about, particularly in relation to your other book, which is Shareology. And in that book, you really talk about how do you make content that is shareable? How do you? So the subtitle you have is How Sharing is Powering the Human Economy. And obviously, I mean, especially now, all of us have been subjected to, all the political campaign ads, but also all the ads for everything. Since the world shifted to being at home during COVID, we're spending more time on our screens. It seems harder and harder for the average person to stand out and to feel like anything that they bother to create will actually break through and get noticed. I mean, I hear a lot of people say, why should I bother? There's just too much noise out there. How do you respond? And what can people actually do to create content that is meaningful to the point that other folks would want to share it?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I would actually take that and turn it on its side and say that not everybody is the same. Everyone shares differently. And to blanket cover all of humanity and say this is the way to share would be putting handcuffs on every 5 out of 6 people, because they don't share the same way. And so how we tell our stories, or what we're willing to share, what are we willing to let go of? How far are we willing to go? How transparent is an overused word, but how transparent are we willing to be? And each person is so unique and different. In Shareology, I actually break it down into 6 different categories of people, and understanding your type first. Like, what kind of sharer are you? So if a company goes to somebody and they're going to walk up to someone who's in my archetype selective, a selective is somebody who would rather actually share privately. They're not going to be as social on a social platform. Then you're actually asking the wrong person to do the wrong thing. And you're talking to one of the most powerful people in all the archetypes, because no one ever hears from that person. So if they truly buy in and believe in what it is that they're going to share, there's been studies and research. This came out of the New York Times research group, where the selective, who would rather just, again, privately share, when they do go to share on Facebook or anywhere else, and they're like, go buy this thing, it's so good, everyone actually goes and buys that thing because they never hear from that person. So it must be really good. Where you take a different archetype, and I'll just quickly name all 6 archetypes. You take there's the altruist, the early adopter, the connector, the careerist, the boomerang, and the selective. Just real quickly, the altruist is a heart sharer. The early adopter is somebody who goes out, buys something right when it comes out, and then they learn it and turn around and teach everybody about it. The connectors, well, we're all here on LinkedIn. Connectors are people that like to connect 2 or more people. The careerist likes to deliver thought leadership. They like to create content. They like to write. They like to create videos. They like to be out there and help other people in their career. A boomerang's interesting because the boomerang actually asks questions of other people to get them to respond so that they can keep a dialogue or a conversation going. Community specialists or community leaders are oftentimes boomerangs, and also trolls are boomerangs too, because they like to send out a question or jive you with something and then get you to respond back so they can keep that dialogue going. And then, like I said, is the selective. So, and the selective is private. Now you can be all of these different things, but again, when you're asking back, Dorie, back to your original question of how do you decide for you what you're going to share? First of all, you have to know who you are and what's comfortable, because if it's not coming from a place of sincerity, then it's not going to work as well. So you really have to find your own way, your own little way of sharing. What is that way that you're okay doing? Is it a private little group in Facebook where you just have 10 people that you can do that with? Or is it a larger group like here on LinkedIn? Is it selective? Is it a boomerang kind of approach where you want to be a community manager and host, groups or parties on Zooms? There's all different ways of exploring content, but my point is find your category, find your archetype. And I actually have a link if people wanted to actually explore their archetype. But that's the best way that I think people can really address what they need to share within their own way of sharing.
Very nice. What is that link, my man?
Yeah, if you go to Bryan Kramer, Bryan with a Y, Kramer with a K.com/personal brand quiz. And you don't have to take the quiz. You can just look at the archetypes and read about them if you like. But that's the easiest way to find out which one you are.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that, Bryan. Fantastic. So we actually have another terrific question that came through. And thanks to all of you who are tuning in. Please feel free to ask your questions to Bryan Kramer. We're here talking about humanizing business. And we had a great question come in from Vidya Sagar, who wants to know, how do you find the right balance between humanizing business and automation, knowing that automation it's here now and it's the future? How would you really begin to thread that needle, Bryan? What are your thoughts about that?
Oh man, that is such an awesome question, and it's going to be harder and harder and more challenging as time goes on to figure out where that works. And usually it comes down to human error. The robots aren't that smart yet. They don't know what they're doing. We're telling them what to do. And so if there's more automation than there needs to be, it's because we set it up that way. If there's not enough human moments, it's because we didn't look at it that way. And so when you're looking at your automation, think about it in this way. Everything that you're putting out there is designed and should be designed to bring conversations closer, to have more dialogue. It's not to push people farther out so you can have less conversation. And that's where I think a lot of people make the mistake of setting up, a sequence in their email or a bot on Facebook or whatever, and they forget the secret ingredient, which is actually, having a Zoom call or a phone call. These days it's human to Zoom to human, but at some point, there does need to be a conversation with a real human. That's what we need to strive for. And if you don't see that in your automation, then it's time to kind of look at your automation again and go, okay, how can we design this so it's going to bring those conversations closer?
Really helpful, Bryan. Thank you. And just as a reminder, so we had talked about your assessment. It's bryankramer.com/personal brand quiz. Folks can get it there. And we had a question come in, Bryan. Inquiring minds want to know. Nancy says, well, what's your archetype? Do tell.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. You know what? I haven't taken my own quiz in probably a year or two. I think when I took it though, I was an altruist. I really love community, and community to me is like, if you want to have the, let's put it this way. If I lost everything today, my entire business, and all I had was $5 in my pocket, I would go create a community of people. I don't even care if it's like 2 people, or 5 people or whatever it is. If I put the right people in and we start having a dialogue, that to me is the best marketing that anybody can do. And it's done for the right reasons, right? You're actually connecting others to each other, and you're also connecting to them. You're providing something of value, and now you can grow this thing into a human network of people that are helping other people. And I can't think of anything more gratifying, and I can't think of a better way to grow a business in the most human way that you can right now. So altruist is probably my best bet, but I'm going to say that I also have to go back and take my own quiz. So I can't exactly remember.
It's a good reminder. Good question, Nancy. And thank you, Bryan, for that. That's awesome. And just a reminder to everybody watching, if you were enjoying this conversation, please hit the like button. Please hit the share button. That way your friends and colleagues will be able to see this as well and enjoy the conversation and some of the great insights that Bryan is sharing for us. And so a question came in, Bryan, and we welcome all of your questions. Please type them into the chat box. But a great question came in from Christina in Prague. She wants to know, what advice do you have for sharers in terms of building healthy boundaries so you don't end up burning out? We're all very conscious these days of wanting to make sure that we're keeping things sustainable. What would you say to that, Bryan?
Well, meditate. The amount of content that you push out is going to hopefully be a large part of what kind of engagement you'll see, right? So you have to hold yourself to that level. You have to kind of pick and see, like, when have I shared, like what actually is an overshare? Like, can you overshare? And I think that you can, and I think that there are those ways that you can do it actually have to be tested and tried to see if it's too much and you've gone over the line, and then you pull back a little bit and go, okay, that's too much for me. And like I said, not everybody's equal. So there's 6 different archetypes here. Not everybody wants to, even like the selectives, they don't want to put any content out at all. They would rather just, they're going to watch from the outside looking in, and they don't want to see. They're just there on Facebook. Maybe once a year they wish, they're looking for the happy birthday, and that's about it on Facebook. And then there's other people that want to share more. I like to divide sharing up into 3 categories. It's kind of like when you take a photograph, and the most interesting photographs are taken in thirds. It's the rule of thirds in photography. And when you take something and divide it into thirds, then it's a lot more, there's a lot more layers and a lot more understanding and a lot more intimacy into that person. And so I divided up into sharing other people's stuff, sharing news, tips, or tricks, and then a third about something that maybe I'm up to, or something that maybe I'm excited about. And so when you do it on those 3 levels, you're not sharing too much about yourself. You're not sharing too much about other things, and you're not sharing all the time about tips and tricks. It's a much more even playing field for sharing.
That's really helpful, Bryan. Thank you for that. Love it. And for those of you who are enjoying the conversation, if you want to make sure that you never miss a LinkedIn Live that we're doing here for Newsweek, again, it's every Thursday, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. And you can go to my website, dorieclark.com, sign up for my updates. You can get a self-assessment and get on my email list. And that way you will have notifications about all of the great conversations we have coming up, including next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, where we're interviewing Robert Herjavec from ABC's Shark Tank. So please feel free to tune in for that. So we have more awesome questions coming in for you, Bryan. I thought this one was really interesting. Annette wants to know, what advice would you give for someone trying to become more comfortable with sharing to help more people in public places like LinkedIn? If someone just feels a little bit apprehensive but wants to get better, wants to get more comfortable, what would you recommend that they do to get started?
Yeah, that's it's interesting that because the way that the LinkedIn algorithm works, it's for the newbies, and if you're just getting started, man, I'm really excited about where you are at. You have the best position ever, because you have the ultimate forgiveness level. When you're just starting out, people are excited just to hear from you. Like it's going to be a magical time for you. You are in the best place. And if I could go back and do it again, I'd want to be exactly where Linda is, because if you don't have a lot of followers just yet, it's just nice to just use your whole platform as a sandbox and just see what resonates, and put something out there and see if they like it a lot or engage with it. And if they don't, well, okay, that's not content that maybe is going to work as well. And so it starts to inform and actually shape what you share versus being afraid of sharing or not holding back. I wouldn't hold back at all. You're in the best place possible to actually share things and see how it resonates without having too much repercussions because you have a large following yet. And yes, one day when you have that, you maybe want to dial back the sharing, but right now I'd say go for it.
Love that, Brian. Thank you very much. Another excellent question came in from Ty. This is something that I think a lot of us wonder about. Can you talk about creating quality content, or how should we do that? How can we think about quality in a world that is always pushing for quantity?
Yeah, that's there's so many ways I could answer that, because content has hit a threshold of all of us. And when you just look at it from Ty's point of view, or from my point of view, we're going to look at it differently. We're going to see and find different things, and that's the interesting thing about all of the social networks, is they're serving up what they think we want to see. And so part of that is how we ingest the content, and being in the right places and at the right time, so that you're serving up the content that people really do desire. I am, and I know, Dorie, I know you are too. I'm a massive fan of email marketing. I just think that is like the most intimate. Like, somebody has said, yes, I will allow you into my email inbox. And that is a very precious place to be for me. And so when you're looking at how you're digesting content, are you digesting it on a network that's sending you what you think you want to see? Or are you using maybe an aggregate or a news aggregate or something that actually gives you what you want to see and how you're viewing that content? So it kind of lies on us as the consumer and the digestive nature of our content, how we take it in, to look at quality of content. And then as marketers, how we stand out is go to those places. Like, for instance, Flipboard is my favorite news aggregator, because I don't have to see things I don't want to see, and I can see things that I do want to see, and it just aggregates everything perfectly for me. So I also market there. I also post all my stuff there too, because I would imagine that there's other people that want to do the same thing and ingest or digest content of that same nature. So I go to where quality content is and work on those platforms or those places, rather than trying to just mass produce content or digest content. Those are the two approaches I would say.
Thank you, Brian. Love that. Just a reminder, if you all are enjoying this conversation, please be sure to hit like, be sure to hit share, so that your friends and colleagues can benefit from Brian's wisdom as well. So we have a question that came in, Brian, from Lisa. Lisa lives in New York, but she originally is from Brazil, so does a lot of international work. And she says, when we're doing business with different countries, we also have to consider cultural differences. So you might try to come across as human, but it just doesn't fly. It might look intrusive. Do you have any thoughts or examples about how to handle sharing in a cross-cultural context when people may just have different ideas or standards about how these things should be done?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you do have to be careful, because your content's not like, when you put it out there, it's not just for the city that you live in. This is like content that now the world can read. I posted, something last night. My wife calls me Gaylord Fokker from Meet the Parents, because I do all kinds of stuff, and then I go, oh my gosh, what did I do? And so that I'm full of Gaylord Fokker moments, which I think is embracing your inner humanness anyway. So I'm definitely a fan of embracing that. And I posted something on Instagram, and then I thought about it. It was about the election. I'm like, I don't want to cross that step yet, and so I went and I deleted it on that kind of level of having a voice, because where I am coming from is from one perspective, but I know everybody else has lots of perspectives as well, and I am potentially putting something out there globally. So yeah, you do kind of have to take care of what you're going to share and think through that and say, okay, how far am I willing to go when I put something out there? I'm also a really, really big fan of private conversations. That is still social. We have Messenger. We have in LinkedIn, we have a private message tool there too. We've got Skype. We've got, I mean, the list goes on to all the ways that we could private message each other. I mean, Twitter has its own DMs. And so you want to get really human to human, actually reach out to someone and strike up a real conversation. People are going to be astounded that you did it because they're used to bots actually reaching out, or, you know, when you go to connect with somebody on LinkedIn, what is the first thing they do? They sell you. Actually don't sell someone, and ask them how they're doing, and do like human regular interaction and see where that actually takes you. And I'm willing to bet that you will have more success there. And in using that one-to-one approach on social media, because that again is social, and test that out. That's where I think the gold is.
Love that, Brian. Thank you. That's very helpful. Now, a question came in from Anna, who I think this touches on something that a lot of people worry about. Sometimes we even tend to overanalyze it because it just seems so confounding. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts about it. She wants to know, what is the frequency, length, and timing that we can use to keep the interest of our audience? What are your thoughts about that? I mean, I'm sure there's probably not one rule, but how do you begin to parse that really important question?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, I think it comes through, again, testing and trying different things. What may work for me may not work for you. We're all so different. And also there's kind of like guidelines on each network. When you look at LinkedIn, like this has now the ability to do the live video like we're doing right now. And so that's become acceptable. I don't know if you would see the same thing on this same kind of content on Instagram. You know, Instagram is a little more social, a little less of the professional network that LinkedIn is. And so you're kind of like, you're going to have to gauge which network is the network where your audience is already at, and then what kind of content is acceptable there. And then you just play within the sandbox of what they've provided you to use the tools and use the things that are available to us. That's probably the best way, but I wouldn't hold back. I think the fun part is actually testing things and seeing how they resonate and try new things. It's not going to hurt you to do too much at first. I think you're going to get more out of it.
Thank you, Brian. That's great. And as we are coming up on the half hour, I just want to remind folks, if you are interested in making sure that you see our future conversations, including our conversation next week, noon Eastern, next Thursday with Robert Herjavec from ABC's Shark Tank, just make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. Just go to this URL here. You can type that in, dorieclark.com/LI. That takes you to my LinkedIn page. You can follow and be sure that you are getting updates about future activities and interviews. And of course, follow Brian and Newsweek on LinkedIn as well. Brian, one more question that I have for you that is an area of inquiry that I know you have been focusing on a lot recently. We have talked a little bit about this. You have been really doing a lot of thinking about how small shifts can lead to epic outcomes. And I'm curious what you mean by that. And can you give us an example? What is a small shift that you've made, or a small shift that perhaps any of us can make that can lead to unexpectedly large outcomes?
Yeah. Oh man, you hit on one of my favorite things to talk about right now. Absolutely. So it's interesting to me as I was doing some research into this, and this is what my podcast is about, is the small shifts and which you were on, Dorie. And I'm really excited to explore this, because I think that we all put so much on ourselves to think that we have to make these big pivots. And the funny part about a pivot, if you look at it from a basketball perspective, is, or being on a court, is your foot actually stays in the same place when you're pivoting. So you're actually not moving anywhere by definition of a pivot. You're just changing directions. And the difference between that and a shift is so much less weight on you. Like when you hear the word shift, you just kind of like go, okay, I can do that. That's doable. We can make a little shift, and that could make a massive difference. And the reason I say that is because, for instance, I was doing some research and found out that that Navy carriers, the big ships, those ships still have a compass inside of them, and the compass has a magnet inside of it. And the magnet over the course of 1 year has to be recalibrated because it's off by 1 degree over the course of a year. 1 degree on a ship is 277 miles. So a small little degree within each of us as humans, within our companies, or within, it doesn't matter what size, a 1 degree shift can make all the difference in the world. And so little things can add up, and they really, really do. So for instance, I lost over 65 pounds in the last year and a half, and it wasn't magic, like it wasn't a secret formula. It was just looking at little small ways that I could increase what and take care of the health and what it is that I put in my mouth, and then the mindset that went into that whole thing. And that's it. It was just these little small shifts that I made and tweaked along the way to make that happen. You can apply that to so many different areas of your life.
That's fantastic. Bryan Kramer, thank you so much for joining us. Again, if you're interested in learning more about Bryan and his work, you can visit his website. It's bryankramer.com. And if you're interested in tuning in the future to all the great conversations we have coming up every single week on Newsweek's LinkedIn channel, you can go to dorieclark.com, subscribe to my newsletter, get a self-assessment, and you will be signed up to receive notifications about this. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you, friends, for tuning in. And Bryan Kramer, and a special thanks to you.
Thank you so much.